They called him the slave boy that science couldn't explain. He never ate, never slept, and yet he lived. On a quiet Virginia plantation, behind clean floors and shuttered cellars, something unnatural was being studied beneath the doctor's roof. When a drowned well spits up bodies, each marked with surgical precision, one chilling journal page leads to a silent child no one remembers being born. What did the physician create, and who let it survive? If you would like me to continue creating stories so that this history, which is not taught in schools, is not forgotten, please subscribe to this channel. Write in the comments where you are watching from. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sheriff Walter Grantham's desk as he studied the letter from Richmond. The Methodist Circuit Office's formal script detailed Reverend Hale's expected arrival time, his planned sermon topics, and most critically, his failure to appear. Grantham's weathered fingers traced the postmaster's mark from Orange, May 11th, just 4 days ago. He gathered his riding gear methodically: tan duster coat, wide-brimmed hat, and the worn leather satchel containing his official ledger. The spring air held an unusual chill as he mounted his horse for the 12-mile ride to Collingwood Plantation. The property came into view just past noon. Once proud tobacco fields lay fallow, choked with weeds that swayed in the breeze. The main house stood like a grey sentinel among overgrown white oaks, its windows reflecting the midday light with an almost defensive gleam. Dr. Collingwood met him on the front steps, dressed in his customary black frock coat despite the warming day. "Sheriff Grantham," he said, adjusting his silver-rimmed spectacles, "what brings you to my humble estate?" "Reverend Hale," Grantham replied, dismounting. "Richmond expected him Friday morning. He was seen heading this way Thursday night." "Ah, yes, the good Reverend." Collingwood's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. "He departed at dawn Friday, quite eager to catch the sunrise service. Said he'd walk east to the Louisa Road, catch a passing cart." Something in the doctor's calm manner made Grantham's neck prickle. "Mind if I look around?" "By all means." Collingwood gestured toward the house. "Though I must ask you avoid the cellar. Volatile tinctures, you understand. Medical necessities. The parlour smelled of burnt herbs, sharp and medicinal." Grantham's eyes were drawn to the fireplace, where among the ashes lay a partially burned rag. Even blackened, the rust-coloured stains were unmistakable. Movement caught his attention. On the stairwell stood a small black boy, perhaps 8 years old, watching without expression. His eyes never blinked as they followed Grantham's every move. "That's just Eli," Collingwood said softly. "One of my brother's people, on loan. Poor child hasn't spoken since birth." Grantham approached the stairs, but the boy didn't flinch or look away. There was something unsettling in that steady gaze, something that made the sheriff's decades of experience whisper warnings he couldn't quite articulate. After a thorough but fruitless search of the accessible areas, Grantham had no choice but to take his leave. In his saddlebag, his official log now contained 3 new entries: burnt herbs present, purpose unknown, blood-stained rag in fireplace, small amount, silent slave child, male approximately, 8 years. Unblinking gaze noted back in his office that evening. Grantham drafted a notice for the Louisa Gazette's Sunday edition. Information sought. Reverend Cyrus Hale, last seen May 11th near Orange, traveling by foot toward Richmond. Any persons with knowledge of his whereabouts, please contact Sheriff's Office, Louisa County. He sat back, studying the boy's unblinking stare in his mind's eye. Something wasn't right at Collingwood Plantation, but without evidence or cause, his hands were tied by law and custom. For now. A late spring drizzle dampened Samuel Trigg's shoulders as he stood in Sheriff Grantham's office that Friday morning. His mud-caked boots left dark prints on the wooden floor, while he twisted his hat in calloused hands. "Two of them, Sheriff. Isaiah and James. Strong boys. Never gave me trouble." Trigg's voice carried more annoyance than concern. "Lent them to Dr. Collingwood Tuesday last. Roof needed mending," he said. Grantham pulled out his ledger, ink spreading dark across the damp page as he recorded the details. "When did you last see them?" "Wednesday evening. Doctor's man came by, said they'd finish Thursday." Trigg shrugged. "Went to collect them this morning. Nobody there but the doctor, telling me they ran off in the night." The sheriff's pen paused. 2 more disappearances, so close to Reverend Hale's. He carefully wrote the description Trigg provided. Isaiah, age 25, scar above right eye. James, age 19, walks with slight limp from childhood accident. Sunday morning brought another grey sky as Grantham and his deputy rode out to Collingwood Plantation. They found Dr. Collingwood in his study, a leather-bound volume open before him. "This disruption is most unwelcome," Collingwood said, not looking up from his book. His fingers drummed an irregular pattern on the desk. "As I told Mr. Trigg, those men abandoned their work. Quite inconsiderate, given my generosity in feeding them." "Mind if we look around?" Grantham asked, already moving toward the door. "By all means." Collingwood's voice carried an edge. "Though I remind you the cellar remains off-limits. The chemical fumes would be unfortunate." They searched the grounds methodically. The roof showed signs of incomplete repairs, scattered shingles and tools left mid-task. In the kitchen, Grantham noticed fresh scratches on the floor leading to the cellar door. Near the slave quarters, an elderly woman sat on a rough wooden stool, threading a needle despite her clouded eyes. Her hands moved with practiced certainty, even as her gaze remained unfocused. "Letty," the deputy said. "Doctor says you might have seen Isaiah and James Wednesday night." She continued her sewing, head bowed. Grantham stepped closer, noticed how her fingers trembled slightly. "Don't look in the walls, sir," she whispered, so soft he nearly missed it. "Look under." "What's that, old woman?" the deputy asked sharply. "Just humming, sir." "Just humming my prayers." Her needle never stopped moving. The deputy scoffed. "Addled with age, that one. Come on, Sheriff." They found Collingwood waiting on the front porch, a small tin in his hands. "Some of my personal tobacco blend, Sheriff. A gesture of goodwill, given these tedious interruptions." Grantham accepted the tin with a nod, noting how the doctor's usually steady surgeon's hands shook slightly as he handed it over. The tobacco smelled sweet, almost medicinal. Wednesday's edition of the Louisa Gazette carried 3 notices on its front page. Missing, Reverend Cyrus Hale. Last seen May 11th near Orange, travelling by foot toward Richmond. Missing, Isaiah, 25 years, and James, 19 years. Field hands, property of Samuel Trigg. Last seen at Collingwood Plantation. May 16th. The paper made its way through town, passing from hand to hand, until it reached the desk of the county coroner that afternoon, carried by a merchant who'd been reading it over his morning coffee. The evening mist settled thick across the fence line, marking Collingwood's eastern boundary. Miss Elsie Crane, her medical bag heavy with birthing tools, paused to catch her breath against the split rails. 20 years of delivering babies had taught her to rest when she could. The setting sun cast long shadows through the white oaks, and she knew she'd be late reaching the Wilkinson farm, where a first-time mother waited. Her skirts were damp from the day's earlier rain, the hem caked with Virginia clay. Something white caught her eye, a scrap of fabric snagged on the rough wood. At first, she thought it was just a torn piece of someone's washing blown astray. But as she reached to free it, her experienced hands recognized the familiar weight and weave of a baby's blanket. The cloth didn't come loose easily. When she finally worked it free, her breath caught. Dark stains mottled the once pristine cotton, and there was no mistaking the sweet, sour smell of dried milk mixed with something metallic. Blood. Miss Crane wrapped the blanket carefully in her shawl, her steps quick despite her fatigue as she diverted toward town. The nearest help she knew was Deacon Morris at Christ Episcopal, who kept late hours on Thursdays preparing for evening services. By first light, Friday, Sheriff Grantham stood at the same fence line, the morning dew soaking through his boots. Deputy Ward circled the area on horseback, checking the ground where the spring mud still held impressions. "Hoofprints here, Sheriff," Ward called out, pointing to a pattern of deep marks. Horse was moving fast, circling back several times. Recent, too. Rain hasn't filled them completely. Grantham knelt, studying the churned earth. Something glinted in the wet clay. Small, white, no bigger than his thumbnail. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and carefully lifted the object. An ivory clasp, delicately carved with a flowing letter R. "Fine work," Ward commented, dismounting to look closer. "Not local craft." "No," Grantham agreed, turning the clasp over. "Richmond quality, I'd say. Maybe Georgetown." They spent another hour searching the area, but the rain had done its work. Whatever tracks might have told the full story were now just formless impressions in the softened ground. By midday, they had ridden to Christ Episcopal with the evidence. Deacon Morris pulled out the church registry, his finger tracing down the neat columns of recent baptisms. Near the bottom of the page, a single entry caught their attention, or rather, the lack of one. A line of careful script had been crossed through with precise, heavy strokes. "When was this done?" Grantham asked, pointing to the blackened line. The deacon adjusted his spectacles. I'm not certain. I check the registry each morning, but I don't recall making that mark." "Can you read what's beneath it?" Morris held the page to the window light. "No, sir. Whoever marked it out knew their business. The ink's ground right into the paper." Grantham laid the ivory clasp on the open registry. "This mean anything to you?" The deacon's eyes widened slightly. Yes. I believe Mrs. Rebecca Randolph purchased several of these before her daughter's christening. From Tiffany's in Richmond, meant to give them as remembrances to the godparents." "When was this christening?" 3 weeks past." Morris paused, staring at the crossed-out line. "The same date as this entry, if I'm not mistaken." Sheriff Grantham's boots creaked on Collingwood's front steps as morning fog clung to the plantation grounds. The warrant, crisp in his breast pocket, had taken weeks of careful persistence with Judge Pickett. Behind him, 2 deputies waited with their horses, watching the silent windows above. Dr. Collingwood answered on the 3rd knock, wrapped in a faded silk robe. His silver hair was unkempt, but his eyes remained sharp and evaluating. "Sheriff?" Rather early for a social call. Grantham produced the warrant. "No social call today, Doctor. By order of the Circuit Court, we're to search these premises." "Fascinating." Collingwood's tone was dry as he examined the document. "And what precisely are you searching for?" "Evidence relating to several disappearances. You'll need to grant us full access, including that cellar you've been so protective of." The doctor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Though I warn you, the chemical fumes may still be quite potent." Room by room, the search revealed a house caught in elegant decay. Dust covered the unused beds, their linens stretched tight as drum skins. The kitchen larder held only dried herbs and empty preserve jars. Even the slave quarters stood eerily pristine, swept clean but devoid of personal belongings. In the root cellar, fresh swept dirt floors and whitewashed walls gave off the sharp scent of lime. A new limestone cap sealed the wellhead, the mortar still soft enough to mark Grantham's thumb. "Recent repairs?" he asked. "Spring cleaning," Collingwood replied from the stairs. "One must maintain standards." The doctor's study proved more revealing. Leather-bound medical texts lined the walls, and a heavy ledger lay open on the desk. Grantham lifted it carefully, noting the precise handwriting. Most of the middle section had been expertly removed, leaving only the beginning and end intact. The remaining pages contained clinical observations. Subject displays continued resistance to standard nutritive requirements. Day 47. No visible deterioration, despite complete food withdrawal. Pulse remains undetectable. Another entry simply listed measurements and strange symbols, followed by Subject E maintains baseline despite increased pressure tests. Thunder rolled outside as Grantham wrapped the journal in oilcloth. He added the ivory clasp found weeks ago at the fence line, sealing both items in his saddlebag. "Taking my private papers, Sheriff?" Collingwood stood in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back. "I suppose that's your right, though you'll find nothing but dry medical observations. We'll let the judge determine that." Grantham moved to leave, but the sky opened up, pelting the windows with heavy drops. The storm would make the clay roads treacherous. "You're welcome to wait it out," Collingwood offered. "I have excellent brandy." "We'll manage." Grantham signalled his deputies, who were already mounting up despite the downpour. The rain lasted 3 days, turning the roads to soup. When Grantham finally reached town, he handed the evidence box to Clara Whitman, the town clerk. "Log this careful, Miss Whitman. Special attention to any mention of Subject E in those remaining pages." The telegraph office in Farmville hummed with the steady click of brass keys against wood. Outside, carriage wheels splashed through puddles left by the morning rain. Inside, Operator James Morton's weathered hands trembled as he held out 2 crumpled message receipts to Sheriff Grantham. "Never seen anything like it, Sheriff." Both messages bounced back from Richmond Station. "But look here." Morton's finger traced the time stamps. First one shows received at 2:15, rejected at 2:10. That ain't possible. Grantham studied the yellow papers, noting the precise dots and dashes recorded in Morton's neat script. The messages contained basic inquiries about Reverend Hale's expected arrival dates, nothing that should have warranted interference. "And the Methodist office claims they never got word?" Grantham asked. "No, sir. Spoke to Bishop Andrews himself when he passed through Tuesday. Said they've been waiting on Reverend Hale's reports since May." Back in Louisa County, Deputy Ward had brought Letty to the courthouse for further questioning. The elderly woman sat rigid in her chair, hands folded over a frayed shawl. Her clouded eyes seemed fixed on something distant. "Tell me again about the boy," Grantham pressed. "The one you called Eli." "Wasn't supposed to name him," Letty whispered. "Doctor said names give power. But that child—" She shuddered. "Never cried, never slept, just watched, still as death. Is he listed in the property records?" "No, sir. Doctor kept him separate, said he was special stock." Her fingers worried at the shawl's edge. "Used to hear things at night, from the cellar, like someone testing strings on a fiddle, but weren't no music coming out." 3 days later, Grantham's horse picked its way up the muddy drive to Collingwood Plantation. The Sunday morning air hung thick with humidity, and no smoke rose from the chimneys. The front door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the house felt wrong. A pot of beans sat cooling on the stove, half-served. Drawers hung open in the study, papers scattered. Upstairs, Clothes had been hastily pulled from wardrobes, leaving hangers swaying. "Check the outbuildings," Grantham ordered his deputies. He moved to the back porch, where movement caught his eye. A shovel leaned against the railing, fresh dirt on its blade. Beneath the porch boards, partially covered by loose soil, sat a rusted tin pail. Inside, nestled in damp earth, lay a small collection of human teeth, adult molars, some with gold fillings. Grantham recognized the dental work. He'd seen it in Reverend Hale's wide smile the day he'd passed through town. A deputy called from the barn. "Sheriff, you need to see this." But before Grantham could respond, distant thunder rolled across the hills. The first heavy drops began to fall, and somewhere in the woods, a crow took flight with a sound like tearing silk. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Collingwood Plantation as Sheriff Grantham's horse thundered up the muddy drive. Ahead, young Caleb Rowe stood wringing his hands beside the collapsed well, his father's axe forgotten in the wet grass nearby. The boy's face had gone pale as creek ice. "Show me," Grantham ordered, dismounting. The summer heat pressed down like a wool blanket, but the air around the well carried a different weight, thick and wrong. Coroner Holt's buggy arrived minutes later, wooden wheels crunching over scattered limestone from the broken cap. The elderly physician moved with practiced efficiency, setting out his leather case and notebook. Behind him, blacksmith Thomas Webb brought rope and pulleys, his broad shoulders tensed against what they might find. "Smelled it while gathering kindling," Caleb explained, voice cracking. "Like when meat goes bad in summer, but worse." Webb secured the pulley to what remained of the well's wooden frame. The rope disappeared into darkness, and the men began to turn the crank. Water splashed below, echoing against stone walls that had stood since before the Revolution. The first body emerged slowly, rope creaking under its weight. Bloated flesh stretched clothing that might once have been a preacher's black coat. Where eyes should have been, only hollow sockets remained. The hands, bound at the wrists with copper wire, ended in raw fingertips where nails had been methodically removed. "Dear Lord," Holt whispered, making a note in his ledger with trembling fingers. "The precision here. These aren't animal marks or decay. These were extracted. 2 more corpses followed. A woman in a torn dress, then a man whose clothes matched the description of one of Trigg's missing farmhands. Each bore the same telling signs: bound wrists, missing nails, and most distinctively, a series of small, circular punctures behind the left ear. "Like someone was drawing from a wine cask," Webb observed grimly, helping roll the bodies onto canvas sheets. Holt crouched beside each victim, measuring wounds with a brass ruler. "These cuts, they're medical. Whoever did this understood anatomy, knew exactly where to—" His voice trailed off as Webb's pole hook caught something metal in the well's depths. A rusted surgical clamp broke the surface, its jaws still clenched as if holding secrets. Dried blood had corroded the hinges, but the manufacturer's mark remained visible. J. Weiss and Son, London, the same maker who supplied instruments to the Virginia Medical College. Grantham wrapped the clamp in his handkerchief and secured it in his saddlebag. Without a word, he mounted his horse and turned toward Charlottesville. The circuit court judge would be finishing his afternoon session. There was still time to file for an emergency hearing. Behind him, Coroner Holt ducked into the abandoned house for a final inspection. In the doctor's study, he pulled open a desk drawer and froze. Among scattered papers lay a single blood-stained page, torn from what appeared to be Collingwood's missing journal. The handwriting was precise, despite dark stains obscuring portions of text. Subject E responds well to reversal intervals of 72 hours. Cold preservation in the lower chamber maintains tissue integrity between trials. The absence of natural decay suggests the rest was lost to blood and time, but it was enough. Holt carefully folded the page and placed it in his medical bag. Outside, the sun was setting behind the oak grove, casting the well's dark mouth in deeper shadow. Sunday morning dawned muggy over Amelia County's red clay roads. Thomas Whitfield swept his merchant's porch, pausing as Sheriff Grantham's carriage pulled up beside his general store. 3 days had passed since he'd found the boy in his hayloft, and the memory still chilled him. "Tell me again what you saw," Grantham said, notebook ready. Behind him, Deputy Ward tied their horses to the hitching post. Whitfield leaned on his broom. "Was doing my evening feed when I noticed something odd about the haystack. There he was, just sitting there straight as a post. Couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me with those empty eyes." "How long was he there?" 3 days at least. Never saw him eat or drink. Just sat there, still as death." Whitfield shuddered. "When I tried to grab him, he moved faster than any child I've ever seen, like a shadow fleeing sunlight." Grantham made careful notes, comparing the description to his files about the Collingwood boy. The similarities were undeniable. Before he could ask another question, hooves thundered up the road. A deputy from the neighboring county reined his horse to a stop, face grim. "Sheriff, you're needed at the railway crossing. There's been a murder." They found the watchmaker's body laid out beside the tracks, precisely arranged like an anatomical drawing. His severed hand rested palm up on his chest, fingers curled around nothing. The man's tools and coins remained untouched in his pockets. "Look at this," Ward said, pointing to the victim's right hand. A silver signet ring glinted in the morning light, its surface engraved with elegant initials. C.H. 2 days later, Reverend Malcolm Pierce arrived from Danville, carrying a leather-bound baptismal record. His fingers trembled as he turned its yellowed pages. "Here," he said, pointing to an entry dated April 12th, 1827. "I performed Cyrus Hale's baptism myself. The ring was his father's, a gift upon taking his vows." The page showed Hale's flowing signature, matching the ring's inscription perfectly. Grantham studied the ledger. "And you're certain this is the same ring?" "Without doubt. Custom work from Richmond, blessed by Bishop Moore himself. The inscription includes a tiny cross between the letters. There, see it?" Pierce pointed to the delicate marking. "Cyrus never removed it. Said he'd wear it to his grave." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "He may have done just that." He explained about the bodies in the well, watching Pierce's face, pale. "Dear God," the Reverend whispered, "what manner of evil?" A clerk burst in, waving a letter marked urgent. "Sheriff." This just arrived from Lexington. The letter was written in a scholar's careful hand. "To the Honorable Court of Louisa County, I feel compelled by conscience to share what I witnessed while studying under Dr. Collingwood in the spring of 1851. The incident haunts me still. He kept a boy in the cellar, small, silent, with eyes like empty wells. One morning, I found the doctor conducting what he called submersion trials. The boy was completely submerged in a water trough. 3 days he remained there, neither drowning nor emerging. When I questioned this, the doctor merely smiled and said, "Some vessels require no air." I left his tutelage the next day. I pray this information aids your investigation. Respectfully, Josiah Brandt, M.D. Lexington Medical College. The stagecoach rattled over Lexington's cobblestones as Sheriff Grantham and Deputy Ward approached the medical college. Josiah Brandt waited on the steps, thin and nervous, clutching a leather portfolio. His ink-stained fingers worried at the brass clasp. Inside the college's empty lecture hall, Brant sat before Judge Harrison and court recorder Thomas Mills. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, dust motes dancing in the quiet air. "State your name and position for the record," Judge Harrison instructed. "Josiah Brant, assistant professor of anatomy at Lexington Medical College." His voice was steady despite his trembling hands. "And you studied under Dr. Nathaniel Collingwood?" "For 3 months in the spring of 1851. I left before completing the term." The judge leaned forward. "Tell us about the boy." Brant swallowed hard. The doctor called him Subject E in his notes. Never used a proper name. The child was different, silent. Still, I never saw him eat or drink. "Different how?" Grantham pressed. "The doctor would test him, cut him with lancets to observe healing. No blood flowed. Lock him in the root cellar for weeks without food. The boy never weakened." Brant's voice cracked. "The water trough was what finally broke me." Mills's quill scratched across the deposition paper as Brant described finding the boy completely submerged, eyes open, motionless beneath the surface. 3 days he stayed under. No breathing, no struggling. Just watching. The room fell silent, save for the scratch of Mills's pen. When I confronted Dr. Collingwood, he spoke of testing the limits of corporeal necessity. Said Subject E proved that life could persist without traditional sustenance. Brant's hands clenched. He talked about starvation intervals, silence ratios, like the boy was some experiment in negation. "Why didn't you report this?" the judge asked. "Who would believe me? A student accusing a respected physician?" Brant shook his head. "I fled. God forgive me. I fled." 2 days later, as Thursday's dusk settled over Crewe, Sheriff Grantham led 6 deputies toward an abandoned tobacco barn. A rail worker had reported seeing an old man and silent boy slip inside at dawn. The barn's weathered boards creaked in the evening wind. Deputy Ward circled wide, finding a rear door hanging loose on leather hinges. "Virginia law!" "Come out slowly," Grantham's voice echoed through the empty structure. Lantern light revealed Dr. Collingwood, hunched in a corner, pressing a glowing scythe blade against his own thigh. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. He looked up, eyes fever bright. "Ah, the law arrives." His cultured voice was calm despite the wound. "Come to witness my proof?" Above them, perched in the shadowed rafters, sat Eli. His hollow eyes tracked their movements without expression. "Both of you, down. Now." Grantham kept his pistol steady. "Don't touch him." Collingwood's composure cracked. "He is beyond you." "Beyond all of you." The boy descended with unnatural grace, each movement precise and silent. Deputies stepped back as he passed, their hands crossing themselves reflexively. In the ash pile near Collingwood's feet, Ward found 2 charred journal pages, the ink barely legible. One passage stood out clearly. Subject H proves less adaptable than E, North Carolina location compromised. Female specimen failed to mature past initial trials. Regrettable, but informative. The Richmond courthouse stood silent in the August heat as Dr. Nathaniel Collingwood faced his tribunal. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting harsh shadows across the doctor's gaunt face. 2 alienists, Dr. James Porter from Baltimore and Dr. William Keating of Philadelphia, presented their findings to Judge Harrison. "The subject displays acute delusional pathology," Dr. Porter stated, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "His writings reveal a mind consumed by impossible medical theories." Dr. Keating unfolded several pages from Collingwood's journal. He speaks of bloodless vitality and suspended animation, as if they were proven science. These are the ravings of a disturbed mind. Collingwood sat unnaturally still, his physician's hands folded neatly in his lap. "You understand nothing," he whispered. "I have touched the edge of death itself." Judge Harrison's gavel echoed through the chamber. "Dr. Nathaniel Collingwood is hereby declared insane and remanded to Western State Hospital in Staunton." As guards led him away, Collingwood called out, "My notes!" "You must preserve my notes." The surviving journal pages were catalogued into the county archive, though many sections appeared torn out or heavily stained. Within 3 weeks, word reached Richmond that Collingwood had died of sepsis, his final words unintelligible, but recorded as subject complete. Meanwhile, at the University of Virginia Medical College, a team of physicians struggled to understand Eli. Dr. Thomas Blackwood documented their findings in precise, frustrated entries. August 17th, 1855. Subject displays no discernible heartbeat. Stethoscope reveals silence where vital sounds should exist. August 20th. No respiratory function detected, yet subject maintains consciousness and mobility. August 23rd. Blood extraction attempted. Needle yields no fluid. Subject shows no distress. The boy complied with every test, following instructions in silence. His skin remained cool to the touch, his eyes tracking movement without emotion. After 2 weeks of baffling examinations, the medical team transferred him to St. Mary's Orphanage under close observation. Sister Catherine Walsh, the orphanage matron, kept meticulous notes on their unusual ward. Her final entry, dated September 2nd, 1855, reads, 6:15 a.m. Unlocked the East Wing dormitory for morning prayers. Found room 7 empty, save for neatly folded sheets. A single footprint marked in ash on the floorboards, small and perfect. No sign of forced exit. Windows latched from inside. The other children heard nothing in the theatre. Night. Eli has vanished. In the Virginia Historical Society's climate-controlled archive, a leather-bound ledger sits in a sealed case. Its last page bears the final known writing of Reverend Cyrus Hale, dated May 11th, 1855. The ink is faded but legible, except where marked by a strange, oily fingerprint that no expert has successfully identified. Reached Collingwood Plantation, near sunset. Doctor offers lodging, though something in his manner unsettles me. An odd child watches from the shadows, too still, too silent. Dr. C calls him a medical proof, but will not explain further. The boy watches me, even as I write this. Still. The entry ends there, trailing into an unsteady line, as if the writer's hand had suddenly jerked away.